just among fun. Military science fiction podcast. Short stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Welcome to the Military Science Fiction Podcast. Today we have a great guest, LL Richman, otherwise known as Lisa Richman. She just released a book series called Battlefield Diplomacy, and we're going to be talking all about her military sci-fi and how great it is and what an awesome person she is. Lisa has a huge resume, including being a pilot, having worked in a radiation physics lab, and having written movies. So she has a lot of experience to draw upon. How are you doing, Lisa?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here.
So she's a physicist, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
I
she's a
know.
radiation
She's a
physicist.
physicist, and so the thing about Lisa writing and developing movies is you have her to thank for Hallmark movies and what they are today and what they mean to society. It's all Lisa's fault.
It's all her fault.
So just remember that.
Yeah,
That's
my
why
job
she's
is to
now
make
writing
grown
military
men
science
cry.
fiction.
Yeah.
So Lisa, tell us a little bit about Battlefield Diplomacy and why you wrote it and why it's so awesome.
Oh, well, thanks. Battlefield Diplomacy is, I wanted to write a series featuring a guy who was a veteran of a war, who had a major injury, that he was dealing with, recovering. So he's not been med boarded, but he's, on medical leave, and he's suffering from PTSD too, because he during the last battle he lost several of his teammates, and one of them got severely injured, and he blames himself for it because it was his call, and he had insisted on he was a POW during the war, and was captured for 6 months, and
Just piling it on this poor guy.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was
Is his
really
name Peter Parker?
Yeah. So he I wanted to feature a guy who thought he was broken, but his teammates knew that wasn't the case, and they still believed in him, and he is, an incredibly skilled, talented warrior, a war fighter, and this is his kind of journey back.
Well, right on. And is the journey back the sort of the theme of the whole series, or just the first book?
It's the theme. It's a theme of the whole series, and I don't know that I would even call it the theme of the whole series. The hook to the book is more during that final mission that he of infiltration behind enemy lines. Now, peace has been brokered, and he's, recovering, in a cabin in the Virginia woods, kind of gone off grid. And the Oniki, which are the species that humanity had been at war with, have now accused humanity of stealing a WMD that they had created, and the only possible person who was there, the guy who was leading it, was Matt, the main character, Matt Whitaker. And so Matt gets pulled back in, and so that's the hook. He knows he didn't do it, and so his mission is to exonerate humanity. So the PTSD is kind of a side thread that goes throughout the three book arc.
Well, that's awesome. I was just reading about the USS Maine this morning, and that kind of was the first thing I thought of was did humanity really steal the bomb, or did somebody else steal the bomb and blame humanity? So that's a really great hook.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was fun to play with.
Now, as a lot of people know, I call you my science advisor. If you read Grimm's War, the Richmond Field. This is the Richmond Field right here. She helped me come up with a plausible explanation on how to keep oxygen molecules in the ship and keep the space out, and it worked out great, and I love it. So I encourage everybody.
Science Officer Richman.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's open source. There's no patent on it. You can all use it. So you do a lot of science, and something I thought was really cool is that at the end of your books, you have like an explanation of the science.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your science background and why you do the hard sci-fi elements.
Well, I was a NASA brat. I was my dad was in charge of flight safety for the Apollo program, so I kind of grew up around science and space and all that stuff. And I've always been a nerd, And I actually when I went to college, I went to college for a biomedical engineering degree, and then my junior year. I had a couple of bad teachers and decided that, I want to do something fun. I've got a cat who's walking behind me right now. Um, and and so I changed to radio, television, film. So all of my electives are like in differential equations and optics and fun things like that. So and then years later, I decided to go back and get my master's in physics, and that's when I met my husband. Anyway, so I've always kind of had a scientific bent.
Mhm.
And then my husband formed his own physics consulting company, and so I worked with him in radiation physics for, I don't know, a little over a decade, working with point sources and a linear accelerator and stuff like that. So that's my background.
Well, one of the things
Did I answer
I
your
think that,
question?
yeah, one of the things I really enjoy is I think you find ways often to integrate the science, or I feel like I always learn something from your books, and like you do it in a way like having the info at the end is always really gratifying, but then also like the way you pepper it through. I'm just always I have a lot of respect for how you do that.
Oh,
But
thanks.
one of the things I was wondering with this series, like what was some of the science that really excited you when you were developing this story and, thinking about the characters, but then also about the aliens and how that plays into, because I know you make things as realistic as you can. I always trust that about what you do. So
Yeah.
can you talk a bit about that and how you kind of thought through battlefield diplomacy and what you think would excite people about that piece of it?
Okay. Well, how about if I out Star Trek first for one of the big mistakes that they made? Um,
One
I
of the very many.
one
We
of
have
the
pushed back
very
Star Trek,
many.
so.
I love learning. I just love learning, and I think that's what comes through a lot in my books is because I'll learn something cool and I just have to share it, kind of thing. So that's kind of the
So in
basis
other
behind
words,
it.
you're a geek and a nerd.
I'm a geek and a nerd. I'm all the things. Um, so with battlefield diplomacy and the Vision Rising universe, which this is, part of, um, I wanted to try to. This is my first foray into aliens, and I wanted to make it as believable as possible. And stupid me, I decided I was going to make a methane breathing alien, which I didn't realize was going to be so incredibly freaking hard. Um,
They still be
but
carbon based if they breathe methane?
they are carbon based, yes. But where we our blood is oxygenated, and the oxygen goes to the muscles to feed them. And the reason why our blood is red is because iron binds with oxygen really easily. And that's kind of the way, remember the silicone-based life form in Star Trek?
Yeah, the
Um,
Horta.
yes, the Horta. So
I
Earth
was just
has,
thinking about that when you were talking about that. Actually,
yeah,
I was thinking I've heard of life based on silicone, but silicone-based life?
yeah. So, Earth is interesting. We've got a ton of silicon here on this planet,
The whole
but
valley of it in California.
yes, as a matter of
Wow.
fact. Um,
James,
but
can you mute Rick for a minute? I mean, just
there's very little life that is based on silicon here on Earth. And it's because it's not very bioavailable. Iron is a lot more bioavailable. Copper is a little bit less. So Spock, Vulcan, copper-based, green blood, right? Wrong. We have copper-based life here on Earth. The horseshoe crab is one of them. In humans, as humans, it's called hemoglobin. It's the oxygen and the iron. Well, in horseshoe crabs and cephalopods, it's hemocyanin, and that is oxygen binding with copper.
So if you needed evidence that Lisa's usually the smartest person in the room, of any room that she's in, you just got it.
So Vulcans should have blue blood, not green. But okay. So anyway, it's that kind of thing that so I dove into that, and
Dived into that.
I went deep into that and created a methane-based life form, which are the Oniki, and based them on
what color
spiders.
is their blood?
Blue. Well, no, it's not blue. It's not blue. It's colorless because they don't have oxygen in their environment, and it's the exposure to oxygen that turns it blue. So it's colorless. Although I don't mention that in any of my books.
Last week when we were talking about aliens.
I know.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So if you're in a firefight scene with them and they get wounded, you don't know if they're bleeding because they're colorless.
Because it's colorless. Yeah. Yeah. I should have used that. I didn't. Throughout all 3 books, I didn't use that at all. Dang it.
A couple of years ago, Lisa, you were writing a short story about, or maybe it was a book, and in the book, you had some operators infill from a future Black Hawk, basically, and into this lab. And I remember reading it and thinking, like, damn, I was in the military. I've met operators. I wasn't one. I've talked to them extensively, and I know you have too with Rob. And I was like, if I didn't know better, I would say the person who wrote this scene was an operator. So how did you get to the place where you write special forces so good that even someone who was in the military can't tell that you weren't in the military?
Well, it's been a process. I've gotten better at it, and it's not because of me. It's because of the people that are my sources. I grew up on science fiction, Heinlein and Piers Anthony, and all these, Alan Dean Foster, all the classics, and David Weber, and then I switched. I found Tom Clancy, and I went nuts with thrillers. I love thrillers. What's that? Well, yeah, that's true. So that's kind of where I think that's kind of where my love for special forces came from, is, Tom Clancy, Vince Flynn, Ben Coas, Jack Carr, all the books, Mark Greaney. They're just, Mark Cameron, all those guys. I just devoured those books. And so when I wrote the Chiral Agent series, I created a task force, I like writing small mission units because I like reading it. And I got contacted by an operator after Chiral Agent came out, who said, wow, you really, you did pretty darn good. And I'm sharing it with my brothers. And I was like, oh, wow, that made my day. Can I use you as a source? Would you be interested in reading what I write and helping me? Yeah. Can I put you to use? And that ended up growing. I'm a member of an honorary member of a veterans group called VTT on Facebook, Veteran Trash Talk. And I know several of the people who are the chief operating officer of VTT is a good friend of mine, Monica Nicholson. And they kind of got me into a group of guys from the 75th. And I also have a friend of all of ours, Rachel, knows a guy from the 160th Special SOAR.
Night Stalkers.
The Night Stalkers. Yeah, he was a Night Stalker pilot.
We had a guy,
Guys
And
we had a
who
guy in
rid
IOB.
behind enemy lines during the Cold War and stole a hind by dismantling it and taking it back in pieces. I just
yeah,
so
I mean, these
amazing.
guys have such stories. And I'm very honored, to be like their mascot, I guess. But they help me a lot.
We had a guy in IOBC who was with the Night Stalkers in Panama. He was.
They're
We used to give him crap by constantly getting the name wrong. We call them the Night Crawlers, Task Force 69. We just kept Task Force 180.
yeah, test for, any other color than blue, yeah. So
I read the first-hand account of the one of the pilots in Black Hawk Down. I can't remember what the book was called now.
uh mm,
And it was his book with
yeah,
somebody else, and that was
yeah.
talking about how the unit got created and the training process and the different things the different missions that they did.
Yeah.
But both of those books were really, really good reads.
Yes.
In terms of even just learning like some small technical details, like what they call their some of the maneuvers and
Mhm.
uh, what their training process is like to be even going from veteran pilots to the Night Stalkers. You are say you've got a couple $1,000 behind the stick. You go to the Night Stalkers and you're a rookie. You know nothing.
You are.
And
Oh, yeah.
It's in the Company of
You are
Heroes by Michael
so
Durant.
green.
that's the one I was
That's who
thinking
it
of.
is.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, Michael Durant. Great books if you ever want to read up on
Yeah.
those. I love both of those books. I've listened to them I think twice now.
Yeah.
Getting back to the
Agreed.
battlefield diplomacy, we all started writing because we wanted people, we love reading and we wanted
Mhm.
to write something that somebody else would enjoy reading. And I think as time evolved and we evolved as writers, we all put more of ourselves into the book intentionally. And now I think we're all at the place as artists where we're like, okay, well, if you read this book, I want you to come away feeling this way or take this lesson away from it, and apply it however you may. Do you have anything like that for battlefield diplomacy?
Mm. Well, I really, really, we all know the statistic about, 22, as far as, veteran suicide goes. And PTSD plays, a big part in a lot of that. And so, I wanted to raise awareness for PTSD, obviously, since Matt, the main character, has it. What was the question again?
No,
What would you like people to take away from the book?
Right. There you go.
Well, I want them to have fun. I want them to learn something. I always want them to go back to walk away from it going, wow, that's really cool. Not what I wrote, but at least something in it that they didn't know before, but now they do know. Because like I said, I love learning and I love sharing that. And I wanted to do it in an entertaining way. I think that's pretty much.
It kind of goes back to
Mhm.
what we were talking about kind of at the top of the show, with your extensive knowledge in what you talk about and how you do all the research. But also, like, you're one of the few authors that I know that not only that I'm friends with, that I've read their books, and you write it in such a way where it could be hard sci-fi in some circles in terms of like the actual science behind everything. But you don't get hung up on that, and your books are full of rule of cool, right? Like as long as it
Yeah.
makes some kind of sense, it's very interesting to read, and it's not you don't fill your books with pages and pages and pages of technical data, which you do, you list that data
Which
at
I
the
don't
end of your
understand
books,
how you
which
avoided that if you're a Clancy fan, but
Right. Well,
Which is
honestly, that's
why
the
I moved
only
it to the
thing.
end.
That's the only thing I don't like about the core Tom Clancy books is sometimes they're
Yeah,
just way too in the weeds with some things.
Mhm.
yeah,
And that's with Lisa's book, you get a really kind of a good cross section of like real good technical details that aren't weighing down the action and the story. And like your aliens, like robot freaking spiders with guns and stuff. Like there's nothing
yeah.
hard science fiction about that at all. That is all rule of cool. And to be able to kind of layer both of those aspects into your writing so well speaks to you as an author, obviously. But it
Thanks.
feeds to both audiences. You know, some people are they don't want to read hard science fiction because they don't care about any of that. They want to read, you know,
Well, it's
kind of
hard work, you
it
know?
is it's very hard work. And that one of the things one of the reasons I don't typically write a whole bunch of aliens in my books is like what you were talking about is I want to do this methane based
Mhm.
alien, but if I want to make that realistic, what do I need to do? And you spend hours and days and weeks kind of researching what you
Oh,
needed
yeah.
to build up around them and
Yeah.
how they act and communicate and all that stuff. And I don't have time for any of that. I just want to write a cool story.
No.
Um, but you do it really well, and it really really shows. And not only that, your prose is very good too, and it's written. Even the technical stuff is written in such a way where it's easily understood, which is why you mentioned a review a couple of weeks ago in our one of our writers meetings where the reader gave it a 1 star and said all this stuff is over my head, and like that's a really interesting way to let people know that you're dumb because
Work on your reading comprehension,
Lisa's
buddy.
the way I've read Lisa's stuff and like I've read it and have absolutely no idea what she's talking about in terms of like the background research of what she's talking about, but the way that you present it in the books is easily understood. If you're really reading the book, if you're just kind of glossing over the paragraphs, you're not going to get it. But it's very relaxed hard sci-fi, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Very,
Well,
very fun hard sci-fi to read.
and the science comes
Thanks.
into play. I'm just thinking back to the first time I learned about Vanta Black, and you had described,
Oh yeah.
I think they're
Yeah.
in a lab and they see Vanta Black, and the character's like, "Holy crap!" And then later on, it comes into play in a very, impactful way in the story.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, and with MILSF, like, that's one of the things we've talked about, right? Is like you give characters like weapon systems, unit organization that can all change based on the science of the situation that the
Yeah.
characters were operating in. And so, one of the things I was kind of curious or would love to hear, like, maybe ways that you have taken science or a thing that you were excited about and had the characters use it in a way that maybe wasn't, traditional, like a kinetic weapon of some kind, but radiation
Yeah.
weapons or like, is there anything like that that you've been, um, excited to play with recently?
Well, I did love the Vanta Black. Of course, Vanta Black's not new anymore. That
Right.
was that was pretty new in 2020 when I coated the ships in Vanta Black or a Vanta Black like substance.
Yeah.
But to have something so black with what is called no reflectance, which basically means that if you look at something that's painted black, there's still going to be photons, light hitting it and reflecting back to a certain degree. But this, if it's totally black, you lose all depth perception. And you can walk, you can't tell how far away you are from it. I mean, you can, bump into it and not realize that you're that close to it. So that was really cool. Josh, the bots were fun to write because,
Right.
some of the stuff that, I don't think it's a giveaway, but there's a sidekick, sort of an alien sidekick that Matt ends up interacting with a lot. And it's a soft bot that he nicknames Spot. And Spot likes to pee on him. So he'll Spot is a cleaning bot, but he's a liquid metal bot. But we now have liquid metal robots that
Yeah.
are that change shape through. They can go from totally malleable to as hard as steel, um, and we do it through gears and magnets. So to take that technology and to make it into a soft bot that's basically just a glorified mop that's, filled with cleaning fluid that inches along the floor. And every time it sees Matt, it pees on him. It pees cleaning solution on him. It was just kind of fun, So that's what I like doing. I like taking, and you don't find out that soft bot really could actually exist in the future until you get to the back end, because who's going to want
So
to?
don't skip reading the appendices.
But working the science in is hard without humanizing it, and without making it an info dump. And sometimes I start with an info dump and I look at it and I go, okay, what do I need to strip out to make it not a mouthful, and how do I just, sprinkle
Well,
that in there?
it's got
So
to
it's
be
a lot of
hard.
editing.
It's got to be hard knowing so much about these details, but not wanting to put them all on the page,
It
because you
takes
got all that in your brain and you're like, they should know, but
I
you
know.
need to know.
It's so cool, man. It's so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, but
That-
that's where I think, Rick, you've written over 80 books. I've only written 34. But,
Only.
Only.
by the time you've by
Josh
the
is
time
burning
you've
with
given
envy right there.
I don't know why you
I
gotta
mean-
call me out, Rick.
by the time you've gotten to the, a dozen or so under your belt, you start to learn that it's a discipline. You just have to, and this is one of those disciplines. You just have to force yourself to sit down and know that, okay, that's not going to sell. That's not what readers want.
Right.
And so take it out, pull it back.
Yeah.
And so really the appendix was just that's really more for me, because I just had to put the cool stuff in. And I
Knowing
couldn't
when
put it
to
in the
info
story.
dump, knowing when to info dump and when not to, when to give the information to the readers,
Yeah.
when the readers want it, is a
Yeah.
skill all of its own, and it's one
Yeah.
that everybody should invest in, because the number of books
Yeah.
that start with info dumps that I've read, and I'm just like,
That's not a hook.
I don't care
And
about
you
your
need a
information
hook.
yet. Yeah, you need a
Yeah.
hook. Yeah, leave
Yeah.
the info dumps for chapter 40.
One
Right.
of the things that I'm wondering about is because your books are the majority of the science and technology in your books is plausible, even if it doesn't exist right now. It's plausible on some level. And so one of the things I'm wondering is because you take for instance, like the liquid metal, and you work that in, and your books not set in the distant future, but it's what, a couple hundred years in the future. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the things that we do in Mill Sci-Fi there are not possible now, but because you do a lot of technology that's based on kind of real world tech now, is there anything that you've done in your books where the reader is like, they comment or they make a review and they're like, this isn't possible, or this, you can't do this. You mentioned Mark Greaney, and I love Mark Greaney too. And his second to last book, Chaos Agent, was about AI and robots and right.
flame throwing
There was
robots.
there was a lot of I like the robot with a 50 caliber rifle on its back,
Yeah.
and just a lot of stuff. And there were so many
He got
kind of
so much.
negative reviews about that
Mhm.
because Mark Greaney writes realistic modern day spy thriller
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
modern day technology, and all the readers, well, not all the readers, but a good chunk of readers were like, this is sci-fi, man, this isn't real. And he's like, no, all these things exist right now today.
Yeah.
They exist
I
walking
was,
around.
I was going to joke when you said there's no robot spiders. I'm like, I bet Boston Dynamics is working on that right now.
Right,
Like, we just need a
100%. Yeah.
use case.
Also,
for that.
the flamethrowing
Yes.
drones are
Right.
really popular in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's anything in your book in Battlefield that either you had concerns about people thinking was not accurate, or that you've had people say, is this really possible?
I think, I haven't had anyone say anything, and I think it's because it's not marketed as hard sci-fi,
Sure.
which, I'm really happy to not be marketed as hard sci-fi, because number one, that's a really high bar. And
Well, because then you
you
got all the
know,
guys with their pushing their glasses up on there. I'm like, well, actually,
Actually,
and yeah, exactly, exactly.
You
So I
it's
mean,
also a
come
tiny
on.
audience. Tiny
yeah.
audience.
do you
Yeah.
ever have the
And
opposite problem though? Which is you posit something that you think is far off, and then it winds up being, oh, they're going to do that like in a year, or it's being worked on
y-
now.
yeah, my current techno thriller that will be published soon that, Athon's had for a while now. I wrote it
Josh.
in 2020, 2021, and I had some stuff about like GPS changing and not being GPS as we know it, but more of a mesh system, and all cellular, stuff
Yeah.
being mesh, and there being instead of Wi-Fi, it being, what's the term, where
Well,
it's
like mesh, I mean, a mesh network. And
yeah,
Mesh is
yeah,
the
we've
word.
had
yeah,
that. The
yeah.
problem is companies don't want to, that level
Yeah, exactly,
takes the
exactly.
control of it.
So that stuff is so starting to be more developed, as is, all of the autonomous. I have, practically the first scene is, Grayson riding in an Uber or a Lyft kind of a thing that's an autonomous rental, and he has to hack past the autonomous rental to, you know,
Is it
and
called a
that
Johnny Cab?
yeah, not in this universe, but it's so, and that's here, but it wasn't in 2020. So yeah, I mean, writing near future science fiction or near future thrillers is kind of a, I used to say that, I like to say that it's kind of like throwing a dart at a dartboard. You can get pretty accurate guesstimation if you're 25 years in the future, but anything past that is just, it's a roll of the dice.
Mhm.
There's a quote back in the late 1800s, right when rail travel was just kind of, becoming a thing. And he was a well-known scientist at the time, and he said that people who travel, railroad cars cannot, something along the lines of railroad cars cannot go more than 10 miles an hour, or people who
I
travel,
think it was
who are
45,
traveling.
wasn't it?
I can't, do you remember that
It's,
he
it's
said
something
they
like
would
if
die,
people would go over 45 miles an hour, their organs would be crushed by the acceleration or something
they
like
would
that.
die of asphyxiation,
Yeah.
was the quote.
Run out of air.
Yeah. So, and and people couldn't imagine, like in the city of New York, they couldn't imagine, the population growing big because they were thinking about horses instead of cars, and they
Right.
couldn't imagine, the manure would pile up so high, So, I mean, it's kind of partly, I think, the way we think, and partly, it's just hard to imagine you can't know what you don't know.
One of my favorite
So,
concepts in science is the singularity, right? The thing that happens
mhm,
that if you were born
mhm.
before it, you could never have
Yeah,
imagined it. And if you're born after,
exactly.
it's totally normal, like the internet, and
It's
stuff like that. And
and
so,
that's
And,
kind of the
and
butterfly effect. You can't.
speaking of the current technology, Chat GPT just gave me the source of that quote. It's from 1830s from an Irish man named Dionysius Lardner.
Yes.
What a name.
It's a great name.
He said
And
that
what? How?
he
Yeah.
said that going over 30 miles an hour would be unsafe or even impossible due to mechanical and health concerns.
Yeah.
that's funny.
I'm curious, one of the things that we've talked about on the show is kind of going back in the revision process and the creation process. And one of the things that I've been working on in Weaponized, but it also happened in Valor too, was realizing that some of the things that I created uh were not extra enough, if that makes sense. One of the scenes
Yeah.
that Steve helped me out with in the first Edge of Valor book, or well, the first Valor book, Edge of Valor, was that in one of the scenes, the investigators watching basically CCTV footage from an incident that happened somewhere, and Steve was like, they're couple hundred years in the future, do you think maybe it'd be like a hologram? And I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. And so I wrote it as a hologram, but that's it. And then he read it again and he was like, wouldn't he be able to manipulate the hologram and move it around and like see different angles? And I'm like, damn it, Steve, I don't want to rewrite this again. But he's right.
Yeah.
As a
And
person who
Yeah.
works with that, in fact, I'm banging my head against a project right now where that tech, not holograms, but the ability to manipulate and, use AI on video in particular is making
yeah,
huge bounds right now, but nobody will flipping pay
Mhm.
for it. So
right.
it doesn't matter that it exists. Like he's a cop in the future. He probably
But I mean, also
doesn't.
you can get like like uh 8K video now, but
Yep,
most
for it.
security cameras aren't anywhere near that. They're installed 20 years ago.
Right.
My
Right.
one of my favorite
Yeah.
things is seeing like going to the bank and it's 2025 and there'll be a picture of somebody like, have you seen this man? He robbed this bank. And I'm like, you are a $27 billion company. And presumably this building is pretty brand new. And that picture looks like I snapped it on my flip phone from 1999.
Hmm.
I know.
Right.
No. Well, most cameras, I mean, I just bought a camera, a security camera not long ago, and it was, a couple of months ago, and it was 2K and 2.4 gigahertz. You know, that's,
Well, and
you
that
know,
range can actually get disrupted. I mean, this is like a
yeah,
whole, we've talked about this. Like you can
yeah.
have the coolest whiz bang technology, but if the government doesn't want to pay for it, or it gets disrupted
Mhm.
by something else, or that bank did the math and was like, we can get robbed, and that's like a 0.000001% of our bottom line, or our biggest worry is actually they're going to kill a teller. They just do the math and like we don't need to pay. Why would
Yeah,
we pay for this?
That was
yeah,
something I've had a lot of reviews on with Grimm, which is like, well, wouldn't they be able to do this 1,000 years in the future, or wouldn't they
Yeah,
be able to do that? And I was like, yeah, but I was in the military,
right.
and the truck I drove was made the year I was born. So it's not like the
exactly.
military gets the latest and greatest stuff. We always joke about military grade, and
I know.
I'm
I
very
know.
cognizant of that when I'm writing
Yeah,
because it's like I don't want them to have the latest and greatest technology
yeah.
because I never was on a military installation that had the latest and greatest technology.
They barely have DFACs now.
I know, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love your small unit tactics that you do and your small arms combat. Some of your fighting scenes are so visceral with the way your special operators act, and you put in just enough emotion that I can relate to them without falling into the trap that some female authors fall into, which is perceiving everything through emotion. And so,
Mhm.
I know you've really struggled to hone that skill. What is some of the stuff you do in your editing process that allows you to go through and like refine those bits?
I had to learn, I had to unlearn something when I left my other job, the video job, because when I first started writing, I was writing as someone um, who was visually describing a person's reaction instead of. I actually had the opposite problem. I had the problem of having to learn how to put feeling into it because instead of saying, you know, that, boy, that was like a punch to the gut. Um, I would say, his expression froze or, and I would describe physically what was happening to him. But that was not, if you're doing limited third person, you're kind of in the head of your main character or whatever character's POV you're in. And so you would have emotion. So I kind of actually had, I guess I'm a unicorn as far as female writers are concerned because I had to actually learn to put emotion in.
Well, it's funny you talk
But
about writing a movie because like 99% of indie authors, their biggest problem is they want to make a movie, not write a book.
yeah,
And they end up writing a scene with nothing but the physical
descriptors.
reactions.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's great. Now I know what every single thing on this page looks like at any given moment. How does it feel? Because we're reading books, and
Yeah.
to throw away the
Yeah.
emotional element of a book is like I'm gonna make a movie, but it's only gonna be audio, and you're just gonna stare at a blank screen the entire time, and it's virtually the same thing. So you don't want to
Mhm.
toss away the thing that books do better than anything else, which is make you emotionally attached to characters.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
Lisa and I both just recently forced ourselves to read a very popular romantasy series that has like 300,000 reviews on Amazon.
I am
And
shocked that you got through it. Well done.
there are things about it that are compelling, but yeah, we're not talking about that here. The thing is, like every character is like you walk into a room and it's not about the action of what I'm doing in the room. It's about how I feel about every person in the room, right? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I
Which
think.
is, I want to point out that's
Yeah.
totally legitimate because most women, I'm in general here, but most women filter the world through how they feel and the people around them. Whereas men filter the world through what is happening and what are the things around me. And
Mhm.
so like it's totally
Mm-hmm.
legitimate way to write a romance novel is how do I feel and what are the people around me and how are they feeling? They even call it women. A lot of women call it. They take the emotional temperature of a room when they enter.
I
Right.
really don't know the legitimate way to write a romance novel.
Well, and I know, certainly men do it. But it's just one of the things with, Lisa's work in particular, I think, and with any like putting a person in a really tense situation, giving enough emotion that you feel that tension with them. But then one of the things I think you're just really good at is choreography of fights too, like knowing the amount of detail to give so it feels realistic without getting bogged down in that. Because that's a thing people really struggle with, especially in like physical fight scenes. Like, you just often can't like physically describe that because it makes you think like they're playing, the hokey pokey or Twister or something, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't actually make sense.
What do you do
And
with his left hand? Where's his right foot?
exactly. And so I think that's something that I really look, respect in your work, and
Yeah.
tying that also with like a scientific concept or they're fighting on a thing. Like there's just all these layers of like things that you build up that I find really gratifying when it gets pulled off and you do pull it off, that they're using
Well,
new
thank you.
tech in a way with small operators would do it in a situation that makes sense. Um, so I think for people that are looking for that, I shouldn't say looking for it, but like I find that that's a thing that just is really good in your work. So um, anybody that's even if maybe you like more techno thriller, or if you like SF, I think you're going to find both things to like in Battlefield Diplomacy and in Lisa's other work. Like we haven't talked about the Chiral Agent series as much, but there's just so much. And Vision Rising, there's just a lot of cool stuff in that series as well. Because there you get into like precog a little bit. So there's like a lot of stuff
Mm-hmm.
the character is experiencing before and how they're dealing with that, was just super interesting to read. I don't know. I find that just I can't recommend that enough.
I've got a question
Thanks.
for you, Lisa, that
Okay.
maybe I should have uh, prepped you
Warned me
for.
about ahead of
Yeah.
time.
So we've talked a lot about the things that you do really well in your books. And
Dun dun dun.
yeah, which you
Now let's talk
do
about the things you
a,
do badly. I'm just
a great many
kidding.
things well in your books, but specifically with Battlefield Diplomacy in the series. Is there something that you found while working on this series that was new, but also um, pushing the boundaries of being comfortable writing it? What was there something that was very difficult for you to write, or a concept to get through, or even just parts of the story that you were having trouble with? What caused you to get hung up in the writing process for this, if anything?
The boy, the aliens, man, I didn't know what I was signing up for when I created an alien. I did, I wanted something. Here I am thinking, well, I want something, legit, man. I want, to create an alien that's not just anthropomorphizing an animal
Mhm.
or, just, brother from another mother kind of thing, where, you're humans on another planet. I wanted to, create something truly alien. And boy, That was hard. That was hard. And I
What was
don't know
hard
that I'll
about it?
ever do that
Was
again.
was it the creating of them, or was it something else?
Well, for one thing, getting into their headspace and writing from their POV was something that you almost have to like, okay, this is the day I'm going to write an Oniki scene and I'm not going to think human at all because it's so very because they communicate. They have no, and of course I had to research spiders like crazy. And, I've got friends who are like, seriously, man, why did it have to be a spider? Because there's a real, it's like snakes. You either are okay with them or you really, really don't like them, and you're not going to read a book about a snake. So,
Was
I
there a
just had
reason
to.
you picked spiders? Or was it the cool factor, or was it something else?
It was the cool factor. It was the cool factor, and the fact that that was a life form that I could see. Maybe I could envision evolving on a different planet. But why did I have to put them in a methane environment? That was hard.
Yeah.
So that really stretched
So if they're
me.
methane-based life form, do they fart oxygen? That's the question I have.
No, they don't, because methane and oxygen, think about methane and oxygen mixture that's very volatile. So, there's one scene, I'm not, that could be a spoiler. Well, just know that methane and oxygen are volatile.
Fine. I used that in a book once with
Okay.
on a
Yeah,
methane moon when somebody saw that they were leaking oxygen into the airlock, and then
yeah,
they set it on fire and it
yeah,
blew up.
exactly. Yeah,
So
yeah.
if it's
I mean, you can't
volatile,
not do that.
did you try to pull off a Jaws finale scene where he uses a scuba tank to blow up the spider?
Uh,
Spoilers.
Because
yeah,
there's oxygen in the scuba tank.
Smile, you son of a.
let me put it this way: a scuba tank was the model that I used for this scene, and
Yes.
I'll leave it at that.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We've had Lisa here for about an hour now, so we're gonna let her go and get back to work. Lisa, it's been great listening to you talk about battlefield diplomacy. Where can people find you and your works if they want to know more?
LLRichman dot is it .com or .net?
Right?
.com.
It's your website.
LLRichman.com. You can join the Spacetime Speakeasy, which is my Facebook group. Spacetime Speakeasy with LL Richman. You just search Spacetime Speakeasy, you'll find it. I'm on X as L Richman, and I'm on Facebook as LL Richman, and I think that's it. Oh, Instagram, I'm Lisa Flyer, LISAFLYR, and it's where I post a lot of my
That would
flying
be
pictures.
LL Richman.
Yeah.
We'll get all the
Yeah.
links on the YouTube video as well, so
Absolutely.
or the podcast.
Yeah.
So
Guys, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. And when your techno thriller comes out, make sure you update us so we know.
I will.
That's awesome.
I will.
Yep. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you all next time.
Adios.